The first time I heard all three of my babies fuss at once, I almost laughed. Ryan was standing beside me in our living room in Nashville, trying to calm one of them, while two of our closest friends hovered nearby, offering help we clearly needed. The house was warmer and louder than it had ever been. There were small gift bags on the dining table, balloons near the windows, and enough food in the kitchen to feed twice the number of people we had invited. It was supposed to be a simple celebration. Nothing formal, nothing huge. Just a few people Ryan and I trusted, gathered together to finally celebrate the three little lives that had turned our world upside down. I was sitting on the couch with one baby against my chest when Ryan leaned over and quietly asked, "You okay?" I nodded at first. Then I looked down at the tiny hand curled around my finger. For some reason, that was what did it. Not the decorations, not the congratulations, not even the fact that we were finally home together. It was that tiny hand refusing to let go of mine. My throat tightened before I could stop it. Ryan noticed immediately. He sat beside me and placed his hand over mine. "What's wrong?" he whispered. I looked around the room at the people smiling at us, then back at the three bassinets we had lined up near the couch. "They're safe," I said quietly. Ryan didn't answer. He knew exactly what I meant. A few weeks earlier, I had been lying in a hospital bed believing the worst part of my pregnancy was finally behind me. I had survived months of fear, gone into labor while my husband was thousands of miles away, and delivered 3 healthy babies. I thought the hard part was over. I had no idea that my own family was about to walk into that hospital room and decide that one of my children belonged to them. And as I sat there at our little celebration, holding my baby's hand, every detail of that day came rushing back. Was I right to cut my family off forever? Yes or no? Let me know your opinion in the comments. Before any of that happened, my life with Ryan was quiet in the best possible way. My name is Allison Parker. I was 33, and Ryan and I had built a comfortable life together in Nashville. We had been married for 6 years, and after everything that happened later, I realized how lucky I was to have married someone who never treated love like something I had to earn. Ryan had lost both of his parents in a car accident a few years earlier. Their deaths changed him. He became more protective of the people he loved, but never controlling. He was the kind of husband who noticed when I was tired before I admitted it, and remembered the small things I mentioned once, and forgot about myself. My own family was different. My father, Stephen Collins, had always been the person everyone adjusted themselves around. If Stephen was happy, dinner was peaceful. If he was angry, everyone became careful about what they said. My mother, Diane, rarely challenged him. She had spent so many years keeping peace with my father that eventually agreeing with him became easier than questioning him. Then there was my younger brother, Eric. Eric and I had never been particularly close as adults. My parents always seemed to have a reason why he needed more help, more patience, or another chance. After he married Vanessa, that pattern only became stronger. Eric and Vanessa desperately wanted children. For years, they had hoped to become parents, but it hadn't happened for them. I genuinely felt sorry for them. Whatever differences existed between Eric and me, I never celebrated that pain. Still, their struggle wasn't something we discussed often. By then, I had accepted that my relationship with my family would probably always have some distance in it. Ryan and I had our own home and our own routines, and I stopped expecting my parents to suddenly become the people I wished they were. Then I found out I was pregnant. I remember standing in our bathroom staring at the test because I didn't trust what I was seeing. "Ryan?" He came down the hallway immediately. I couldn't even speak. I just held it out. He looked at the test, looked at me, and then looked at it again. "Are you serious?" I started laughing. Ryan wrapped his arms around me, and for several seconds neither of us said anything. That night, we sat together talking about everything from where we would put the crib to whether either of us was actually prepared to be responsible for another human being. For the first time in a long time, I also let myself hope that maybe this baby could bring my family closer. When I told my parents, their reaction was polite but restrained. Mom congratulated me. Dad said he was happy for us. Eric and Vanessa were quieter. I understood why, so I didn't push. At that point, Ryan and I believed we were preparing for one baby. A few weeks later, we walked into a routine appointment expecting reassurance that everything was progressing normally. Instead, I watched the person examining me pause. Ryan squeezed my hand. I turned toward him, suddenly nervous. Then we heard something neither of us had prepared ourselves to hear. There wasn't just one baby, and there weren't two. I stared at the screen without understanding what I was looking at. Ryan was still holding my hand, but his grip had tightened. I remember asking, "Is everything okay?" The answer changed every plan we had made. We were expecting triplets. For a few seconds, Ryan and I just looked at each other. I actually thought there had been some kind of mistake. We had spent weeks talking about one crib, one car seat, one baby waking us up at 2 in the morning. Now there were 3. Ryan was the first one to laugh. "3?" he said, looking from me to the screen. "We're having 3?" I started laughing too, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. Once the shock settled, the reality became much more serious. My pregnancy needed closer monitoring. There would be more appointments, more precautions, and a much higher chance that the babies would arrive early. Suddenly, every week mattered. Ryan took that seriously from the beginning. As my pregnancy progressed, he started doing almost everything that required lifting or too much time on my feet. He handled groceries, cooked whenever I was exhausted, and came to every appointment he could. Our house changed too. One crib became 3. Boxes of diapers started filling a closet. Ryan assembled furniture in what had once been our spare room while I sat nearby reading instructions he insisted he didn't need. "You put that piece on backward," I told him one afternoon. He stared at it for several seconds. "No, I didn't." "You did." He checked the instructions. Then he quietly took it apart. I laughed so hard I had to leave the room. Those little moments kept me calm, because underneath the excitement, I was scared. By the time I was well into the pregnancy, even simple things exhausted me. Sleeping became difficult. Walking from one side of the house to the other sometimes felt like work. My family knew all of this. Mom occasionally called, but neither she nor Dad offered much practical help. Eric barely checked on me. Vanessa's reaction was harder to understand. Whenever the babies came up, she became quiet. Once, during a family phone call, I mentioned that Ryan and I were trying to figure out how we would manage 3 newborns at once. Vanessa said, "Some people get everything." The line went silent. I knew exactly what she meant. Still, I let it go. I reminded myself that she and Eric had spent years wanting a child. I told myself her comment came from pain, not resentment. Ryan wasn't as willing to dismiss it. After the call, he looked at me and said, "You don't have to keep making excuses for people just because they're family." I told him it wasn't worth turning into an argument. At the time, I believed that. Then, as I entered the final stretch of my pregnancy, Ryan came home from work one evening with a look on his face that immediately worried me. His company needed him overseas for an important meeting, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Ryan didn't even take off his jacket when he told me, "I don't want to go." I was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands resting on my stomach. By then, I was 8 months pregnant, and almost everything had become uncomfortable. "When?" I asked. "Thursday." That was 3 days away. His company needed him at an overseas meeting that had been scheduled with very little notice. He explained that several senior people would be there, and that his presence was expected. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a routine work trip. Nothing about our circumstances felt normal. "How long?" "A few days. I'll come straight home when it's finished." I could see the conflict on his face. Ryan had already started turning down unnecessary travel because of my pregnancy. With triplets, we both knew there was a real possibility I wouldn't make it to the date we had originally imagined. "We can tell them no," he said. "I'll figure it out." Part of me wanted him to. But I also knew how much responsibility he carried at work. "We've made it this far," I told him. "I'll be okay for a few days." He wasn't convinced. Before leaving, Ryan stocked the refrigerator, checked everything around the house, and made me promise that I wouldn't try to handle anything difficult alone. Then he asked the question neither of us had really wanted to discuss. "What about your parents?" I knew what he meant. If something happened while he was away, they were the closest family I had. "I'll call Mom," I said. I spoke to Diane that evening and explained that Ryan would be out of the country briefly. I didn't ask her to move in with me. I didn't expect anyone to rearrange their entire life. I only asked if she and Dad could keep their phones nearby in case I needed help. "We'll have them on," she told me. That was enough to make me feel better. On the morning Ryan left, he stood at the front door longer than necessary. "Call me for anything," he said. "I will. I mean anything, Allison." I smiled. "Go before you miss your flight." He kissed me, then rested his hand against my stomach. "Stay in there until I get back," he whispered. I laughed. After he left, the house felt strangely empty. The first day passed without a problem, so did most of the second. I kept my phone close, rested as much as possible, and reminded myself that Ryan would be home soon. Then, late that night, I woke up with a sensation strong enough to make me sit upright. I waited for it to pass. A few minutes later, it happened again. By the third time, I wasn't trying to convince myself it was nothing. I reached for my phone. The first person I called wasn't Ryan. It was my mother. My mother answered after several rings. "Mom, I think something's happening." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" I explained that the pain had started suddenly and was becoming regular. I told her Ryan was still overseas and that I was alone. "Can you and Dad come over?" I wasn't asking them to diagnose anything. I just didn't want to be by myself while I figured out what to do next. Mom sighed. "Allison, are you sure you're not overreacting?" That question stunned me. I'm 8 months pregnant with triplets. "I know, but maybe you should wait a little." Another wave came while she was speaking. I stopped answering and concentrated on getting through it. "Mom, please. I need somebody here." She told me to hold on. I heard muffled voices in the background. Dad was there. A moment later, Stephen came onto the phone. "What exactly do you expect us to do?" For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. "Dad, Ryan isn't here. I need to go to the hospital." "Then call the hospital." "I don't want to drive like this." "Then don't drive." His voice was completely calm. That somehow hurt more. "Can you please just come get me?" He told me it was late, and that if this was really an emergency, I should call an ambulance. Then the call ended. I sat there staring at my phone. I had spent years telling myself that my parents were simply distant, that they weren't affectionate people, that expecting them to behave like Ryan's family once had wasn't fair. But that night, I finally understood the difference between being distant and simply not showing up when your daughter needed you. Another contraction pulled my attention back to what actually mattered. I called emergency services. I explained that I was 8 months pregnant with triplets, alone at home, and having regular contractions. From that moment, things moved quickly. The dispatcher kept me focused until the paramedics arrived. When I saw the ambulance lights through the front window, relief washed over me so strongly that I nearly cried. I unlocked the door and waited. The paramedics were calm, which helped me stay calm. They asked questions, checked me, and told me they wanted to get me to the hospital. As they helped me out of the house, I looked once at the empty driveway. Some ridiculous part of me had still expected my parents' car to appear. It didn't. Inside the ambulance, I finally called Ryan. He answered immediately. "Allison?" I could hear the panic in his voice before I said anything. "I'm on my way to the hospital. What happened?" "I think they're coming." For a moment, Ryan said nothing. Then he started asking questions so quickly that I had to interrupt him. "I'm okay. The paramedics are with me. I'm coming home." "Ryan, you're overseas." "I don't care." I told him to contact his company, change whatever he needed to change, and call me as soon as he knew his travel arrangements. When we reached the hospital, I was taken inside and evaluated immediately. Everything suddenly became real. This wasn't a false alarm. My babies were coming early. I lay there listening to people explain what needed to happen, while wishing Ryan was beside me. But underneath that fear was something else. Anger. My parents had known I was alone. They had heard me ask for help, and they had chosen to stay home. I didn't know it yet, but that wouldn't be the most painful choice my family made that week. Not even close. Once the medical team confirmed that the babies were coming, everything around me seemed to speed up. Because I was carrying triplets and they were arriving early, the doctors recommended a C-section. I was frightened, but there wasn't much time to sit with that fear. I kept thinking about Ryan. He should have been beside me. Instead, he was thousands of miles away trying to get on the earliest flight back to Nashville. Before I was taken in, my phone rang. It was him. "I changed my flight," he said. "I'm coming home." "When?" "As fast as I can." "Allison, I'm so sorry I'm not there. Just get home safely." I could hear how upset he was, so I forced myself to sound calmer than I felt. "We're going to be okay." That was what I wanted to believe. The delivery became a blur of bright lights, calm voices, and me trying to follow every instruction I was given. Then I heard the first cry. I stopped breathing for a second. Another followed. Then another. 3 separate little voices. I started crying immediately. I kept asking the same question. "Are they okay?" I needed to hear the answer more than once before I believed it. All 3 had arrived safely. Because they were early, the medical team wanted to monitor them carefully, but nothing I was hearing sounded like the disaster I had spent months secretly fearing. I had 3 babies. Ryan and I had actually made it to this moment. Later, when I was settled into recovery and finally had my phone again, I called him. The second he saw my face, he asked, "They're here?" I couldn't stop smiling. "They're here." "All 3?" "All 3. Ryan covered his mouth with his hand. For several seconds, neither of us could say anything. Then he laughed and wiped his eyes. "I missed it. You'll have the rest of their lives." That was when he told me his return travel was arranged, and he would get to Nashville as soon as the flights allowed. After we ended the call, I lay there feeling more peaceful than I had in months. And that was when I made the mistake of thinking about my parents. Despite what had happened the night before, I wanted to believe the birth might change something. Maybe hearing that their 3 grandchildren had arrived would make them realize how badly they had handled things. So I called my mother. "Mom," I said when she answered, "the babies were born." Her entire tone changed. "All 3? "Yes." There was a brief silence before she asked, "And they're okay?" "They're doing well." She said she wanted to come to the hospital. After the way they had abandoned me, I should have hesitated. Instead, I felt relieved. I told her they could visit. I thought my family was finally coming because they wanted to meet my children and make things right. I had no idea that before they ever walked into my hospital room, they had already been discussing what they believed I should do with one of my babies. The next time my mother called, she told me they were on their way. Not just her and Dad. Eric and Vanessa were coming too. That surprised me, but I tried to see it as a good sign. Maybe becoming an aunt and uncle meant something to them. Maybe Vanessa's strange comments during my pregnancy really had come from disappointment about her own situation, and I had been right not to take them personally. By the time they arrived, I was exhausted. I had barely slept. My body felt drained from everything that had happened, and all I wanted was for Ryan to walk through the door. Still, when my family entered my room, I smiled. Mom came in first. Dad followed her, then Eric and Vanessa. For the first few minutes, everything seemed almost normal. Mom asked how I was feeling. Eric looked around the room and made a comment about how strange it was that I was suddenly a mother of 3. Vanessa barely looked at me. Her attention stayed on the babies. I noticed it, but I didn't immediately think anything was wrong. Then Dad asked, So how are you going to manage 3? I gave a tired laugh. Probably with very little sleep. Nobody laughed with me. Dad glanced at Eric. That was the first moment I felt something shift. I looked at Mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. What? I asked. Dad pulled a chair closer to my bed. You know what Eric and Vanessa have been through. My stomach tightened. I already knew where the conversation was heading emotionally, but what he said next was so far beyond anything I expected that for a moment, I genuinely wondered if I had misunderstood him. You have 3 babies now, he said. Your brother has none. I stared at him. And? Dad spoke as if he were explaining something perfectly reasonable. We think you should let Eric and Vanessa raise one. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, because my brain rejected the possibility that he was serious. I'm sorry? Vanessa finally looked directly at me. We could give one of them a good home. One of them already has a good home. Eric leaned forward. Allison, nobody's saying you're a bad mother. Then what exactly are you saying? He looked at Dad instead of answering me. That told me everything. This conversation hadn't started in my hospital room. They had discussed it before coming. I turned to my mother. Did you know about this? Mom hesitated. That hesitation hurt. We just think you should hear them out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The night before, I had called these same people because I was alone and scared. Nobody came. Now all 4 of them had managed to get to the hospital because they wanted something from me. No, Dad frowned. You haven't even thought about it. There's nothing to think about. Vanessa's expression changed. You have 3, Allison. The way she said it made my skin crawl. As if my children were numbers on a page. As if having 3 meant one was extra. I looked at her and said, They're my children, all 3 of them. Eric stood up. You know what Vanessa and I have gone through. I do. And I'm sorry. But that doesn't give you a claim to my baby. Dad's voice became firmer. Watch how you're talking to your brother. I turned toward him. I'm lying in a hospital bed after giving birth to 3 babies, and you're telling me to hand one over. How exactly would you like me to respond? Nobody answered. For several seconds, the room went quiet. Then Dad stood. He looked at the babies, then back at me. You're being selfish. That word almost took my breath away. I had spent my whole life hearing some version of it whenever I refused to give my family what they wanted. But this wasn't money. This wasn't a favor. This wasn't something I could replace. I looked straight at Stephen. No child of mine is leaving with anyone. Eric muttered something under his breath. Dad turned toward him. Then Vanessa stepped closer to one of the babies. I immediately sat straighter. Don't. She stopped. My father looked at me with an expression I knew too well. The conversation was over in my mind, but in his, my answer was apparently still negotiable. I looked at Vanessa and repeated myself. Please step away from my baby. She did, but only after glancing at Eric. That small look between them told me they had discussed far more than they were admitting. Dad moved closer. Allison, stop turning this into something ugly. I almost couldn't believe those words came from him. I'm turning it ugly? You could help your brother. Not by giving him my child. Eric finally lost his patience. You have 3, and they're all mine. His face tightened. You know Vanessa can't have children. I looked at him. And I am genuinely sorry for what you 2 have been through. But you don't solve that by deciding you can take one of mine. Mom stepped forward. Everyone needs to calm down. I turned toward her. Then tell them to leave. She didn't. Of course she didn't. Instead, Dad looked toward one of the babies again. Then he said something that made the entire situation suddenly feel much more serious. You'll understand later that this is best for everyone. He moved toward the baby. I immediately reached out. Dad, don't. He ignored me. Stephen picked up my newborn and turned toward Vanessa. For 1 second, I froze. Then every protective instinct in me took over. Give me my baby. Vanessa stepped forward, as if she expected Dad to hand the baby to her. I reached toward him. Dad, now. Eric moved closer too. Just let Vanessa hold the baby. No, my voice was louder this time. Dad turned back toward me. You need to stop acting like we're strangers. You're trying to take my child. Nobody is taking anything. Then put my baby back. Eric spoke from behind him. Dad, don't let her do this again. She always gets her way because everyone backs down. That was when I realized Eric wasn't trying to calm our father. He was pushing him. Dad looked at me, then at the baby in his arms. I tried to move closer and take my child back. Give me my baby. Stephen reacted in anger. His hand struck the side of my head. For a second, I was too stunned to process what had just happened. Then I heard my baby crying. Nothing else mattered. Not Dad, not Eric, not whatever excuse Mom was already starting to make. My eyes went straight to the bedside control. I hit the emergency call button. Dad's expression changed immediately. What are you doing? I didn't answer. Eric looked toward the door. Vanessa stepped away from Dad. Mom whispered, Allison, was that really necessary? I stared at her. Yes. Footsteps were already coming from the hallway. Dad quickly placed my baby back where the hospital staff had arranged for the babies to be kept near me. Eric moved toward the door. Eric, stay here, I said. He ignored me. The door opened just as he slipped into the hallway. Hospital staff rushed inside. Everyone started talking at once. I didn't. I pointed toward my babies first. Then I looked at the staff member closest to me. My father took my baby after I told him not to, I said. Then he struck me when I tried to stop him. The entire atmosphere changed. One staff member immediately stayed with me and the babies, while another moved toward Dad. Stephen started explaining that this was a family misunderstanding. I shook my head. No, it isn't. For once, I wasn't going to soften what had happened just to protect my family from the consequences of their own choices. And judging by the voices gathering outside my hospital room, they were about to discover that being related to me didn't give them the right to walk away from what they had just done. Within minutes, hospital security was standing inside my room. One officer positioned himself near Dad, while another asked Mom and Vanessa to remain where they were. Dad immediately started protesting. This is ridiculous. I'm her father. I looked at him from the bed. That doesn't change what happened. A staff member asked me to explain everything from the beginning, so I did. I told them about Dad demanding that I give one of my babies to Eric and Vanessa. I explained that I had repeatedly refused, that he had picked up my baby anyway, and that he had struck me when I tried to stop him. Vanessa interrupted. Sealing a baby? I looked directly at her. Then why didn't you accept my answer when I said no? She had nothing to say. Mom started crying. Dad kept insisting that the situation had been misunderstood. But this time, there were people in the room who weren't part of my family. They didn't care that Stephen was used to being obeyed. They cared about what had happened. Hospital security contacted the police. When officers arrived, I repeated my account again. Staff members who had responded to my emergency call explained what they had seen when they entered. Then someone asked about Eric. He was here, I said. He left as soon as I pressed the button. An officer asked for his information. I gave them what I knew. By then, I was exhausted, but I wasn't backing down. Dad was removed from my room. Mom and Vanessa were kept there long enough for officers to sort out everyone's role and take statements. I asked the hospital to make one thing absolutely clear in my records. None of them had permission to visit me or my babies again. When the room finally became quiet, I reached for my phone. There were several messages from Ryan. I called him. The moment he saw my face, he knew something else had happened. Allison, what's wrong? I swallowed. My family came. There was a pause. And? I looked toward my babies. They tried to leave with one of them. Ryan went completely silent. I told him what happened. When I finished, his voice was different, calm, controlled. I'm coming home, he said. And from now on, none of them gets near you or our children again. For the first time since my family had entered that room, I felt like I could breathe. But Eric was still gone. and the police were now looking for him. Ryan reached Nashville as soon as his return flights allowed. When he finally walked into my hospital room, he didn't say anything at first. He came straight to me, wrapped his arms around me, and then stood beside the babies for what felt like forever. "I should have been here," he whispered. "No, you couldn't have known." He looked at me. "They knew you were alone." I knew exactly who he meant. Ryan was furious, but he never went looking for my family. Instead, he helped me handle everything the right way. We spoke with the police, cooperated with every request, and made sure the hospital preserved the available records connected to what had happened. I told the truth exactly as I remembered it. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't need to. Eric's decision to leave the hospital didn't make the situation disappear either. Police eventually located him while he was trying to leave the Nashville area. After that, the investigation focused on what each member of my family had actually done. The case took time. Real life didn't wrap itself up in a week just because I wanted closure. There were interviews, paperwork, meetings, and court dates. I hated having to repeat what happened, but Ryan came with me whenever he could. What mattered most to me was that my children were safe. When we were finally discharged, Ryan drove us home. That first night, I stood in our living room looking at 3 bassinets and realized I had never felt more exhausted or more grateful. The legal case continued without me needing to chase revenge. Prosecutors handled the criminal side based on the evidence and statements gathered at the hospital. Stephen faced the most serious consequences because he had ignored my refusal, taken my baby from me, and escalated the confrontation. Eric also had to answer for his involvement. Diane and Vanessa faced consequences based on what investigators determined about their participation in the plan and what happened inside my room. By the time the court process ended, there were convictions and court-ordered restrictions that made one thing very clear. None of them could simply pretend that what happened had been a normal family disagreement. Stephen received the harshest sentence. For me, though, the most important decision wasn't made by a judge. I made it myself. I cut contact with all 4 of them. No calls, no surprise visits, no access to my children. Ryan never asked me to forgive them, and he never pressured me to forget. He simply helped me build the peaceful home I had wanted all along. And eventually, when life stopped feeling like one emergency after another, Ryan and I decided it was finally time to celebrate our babies properly. That decision brought me back to the room where my story began. And just like that, I was back on our couch. The same little hand was still wrapped around my finger. Ryan was beside me, watching quietly as I wiped my eyes. "They're safe," he said. This time, I smiled. I know. That was the difference. For weeks, I had been thinking about everything my family had taken from that experience. The fear, the hospital room, the first days that should have been peaceful. But sitting there, surrounded by people who had shown up because they genuinely loved us, I realized Stephen hadn't taken the most important part. My children were home. Ryan was home. And I was no longer waiting for my parents to become the family I needed. A little later, Ryan stood beside me as our friends gathered around. We had kept one small thing for this moment: their names. Ryan looked at me and smiled. I picked up our first little boy. "This is Owen." Ryan gently lifted his brother. "And this is Henry." Then I reached for our daughter. I looked down at her tiny face before turning toward everyone. "And this is Grace." The room filled with applause, laughter, and a few happy tears. I looked at Owen, Henry, and Grace, then at Ryan. For years, I thought family was something I had to keep fighting to hold together, no matter what it cost me. I don't believe that anymore. Family is the person who gets on the first flight home. It's the people who show up when you need them. And it's 3 tiny hands reminding me that sometimes losing the family I kept chasing is exactly how I finally found the family I was meant to protect.